Good morning, everybody. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to today's OSCE Security Day on enhancing security through water diplomacy and looking at the role of the OSCE in this context. I'm particularly happy that we managed to put water as such on the agenda of the organization, albeit this is happening through a security day, so a track 2, if not a track 1.5 event. Water is in many ways already very present in a number of things that we do already. And perhaps the time has come to take a look at how we can address this issue more systematically. I'm personally also very interested in this because I have a water background myself. My first job before joining the Foreign Ministry was at the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, where I was dealing with water issues for over a year, dealing with hydrographic basins and the use of water. And when I think back to what I was working on at the time, I see that some of the process, some of the concerns are still out there. But I also see that the concepts we're working on, integrated water management in hydrographic river basins, remain key concepts on which the international community is working. And in many areas we see the need to work to achieve that process that has been elusive. What has changed over time is, however, the importance of the issue and the relevance of the issue because of a number of other factors. The pressure of populations, for instance, the population growth and the use of water for development, for agriculture, for sanitation. The pressure is increasing, and this is generating tensions within societies, but also among countries. Climate change. We see the impact of climate on water, and in some cases too much. We just saw these terrible floodings in Southeast Europe and how badly affected the countries were, but also the UK last winter. So it is an issue that is dramatically now taking its own profile and an issue that we need to start addressing more systematically. On the other side, we see the droughts and the impact of droughts on economy and the impact this has on displacement of populations, migration. So water-related issues, even though they may not provoke directly conflicts, but they are the causes of a number of developments that may produce tensions and they may result into conflicts. So dealing with water more and more is very much related to conflict prevention and to crisis management. The OSCE, as I was saying, is dealing with water in many respects and in many ways. And one of the things we can do in this Security Day is looking at a number of models within or outside the OSCE, certainly in the OSCE area, and look at the stories we have, good stories. The Danube Commission, for instance, a very good example, established in 1948 and functioning throughout the Cold War. So when there is a concrete interest, also the divisions, the political security divisions, at the end of the day, don't block cooperation. And in 1994, the Danube River Protection Convention established the International Commission for the Protection of the River. Many stories we have which show also the importance of dealing with water in context of conflict resolution, the work we're doing on the Dniester River. And the ability for us to engage with the communities in the Transnistrian region of Moldova, with NGOs, with civil society, to address issues related to waters and addressing common concerns of the people is one way of opening up bridges and have the societies communicate to each other and deal with these issues. The water projects we run in Georgia, the Zonkari Dam project, where we also engage with communities in South Ossetia through water-related activities. Those are all very good examples we can look into. The environmental aspect of what we do, the work we do through MSEC is also very relevant and very important, and perhaps looking at some of the experiences we have there, the projects on climate and security, the activities, the centers, the oral centers that we're opening, raising awareness and spreading a bit more a sense that it is important for governments to focus increasingly on issues such as this. So what we would like to get out of this Security Day, apart from mapping out what we have, good experiences, best practices, but also trying to see ahead, first of all, how can we make more systematic what we do, but also what next steps can we consider. We have a number of excellent speakers today. In particular, I'm happy to welcome His Royal Highness Prince Hassan bin Talal. I was in Budapest at the Water Summit, and I heard him intervene at that summit. And I'm really looking forward, also in the light of the presentation you gave there, to your own perspective. And Jordan is a very active partner of the OSCE, so also it's a perspective that is very relevant for our organization. The Mediterranean dimension is also a dimension where the issues related to water are very important. We have the Valencia process, and one meeting of that process did take place, in fact, in Jordan a couple of years ago. So I'm looking forward also to his contribution, but to the contribution of all the speakers. I don't think we should, in an OSCE context or in this context, focus too much on narrow issues. Central Asia, for instance, and I see that the Special Representative Secretary General and head of the Center of Preventive Diplomacy in Central Asia, Ambassador Yencha, is here today. And Central Asia will be an important part of our discussion, but we shouldn't be discussing here issues related to one dam or another. That's something that the UN are doing very well, and we should be supporting the UN in their work. But we should be looking more broadly at the process around this, and encouraging countries to work together, to establish mechanisms to address their issues. There has to be a very strong ownership by the countries. It's their call, it's their issues. They have to find arrangements among themselves. But we as the organization, we can put our toolbox at their disposal. Perhaps we can adjust the toolbox. Perhaps we can think of CBMs in the water field. I don't know. This is something that I leave for the discussion and the conclusions. But from my part, I really look forward to a good day of debate, and I would like at this point to give the floor to Ambassador Greminger. I'm very grateful, in fact, to Switzerland and together also to Germany and Serbia for their support to this event, the financial support, much appreciated. So thank you very much. Thomas, a few introductory words on your side. Thank
you. Your Royal Highness, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, water is essential for our survival. It cannot be substituted, and it is finite. Population growth, economic growth, contamination, and climate change are putting a growing pressure on the resource, increasing water stress and water-related conflicts in the OSCE region and indeed globally. As John F. Kennedy once said, and I quote, "Anyone who can solve the problems of water will be worthy of 2 Nobel Prizes, one for peace and one for science," end of quote. And I guess those words are more appropriate now than they have ever been in the 50 years since they were spoken. The global water crisis is one of the most pressing political, environmental, and social issues of the 21st century. 2.5 billion people still have no access to proper sanitation, with all the implications this has for health, dignity, and ultimately prosperity. Water demand is increasing and is unlikely to keep pace with water supply. According to the most recent estimates, over 50% of the global population may live under water stress by 2050. The consequences of these mounting water challenges are multifold. They can negatively affect regional and global food security, exacerbating disease, hunger, and poverty. But they can also fuel social tensions, weakening fragile states, and exacerbate regional tensions, particularly if water sharing arrangements are absent, inadequate, or insufficiently implemented. The OSCE, as the largest regional security organization, can and must address the challenges of water, which are now firmly established on the global security agenda. As the Secretary General has said, water is not an issue for the OSCE, but one that calls for renewed attention. This year is the 25th anniversary of the Sofia meeting on the protection of the environment organized by the Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe, CSC. Since the Sofia meeting in 1989, much has changed. Politically, the dissolution of Yugoslavia and the Soviet Union has had implications on the environment and security. Domestic rivers became international ones and required new regulation mechanisms. In the environmental sphere, in particular in the framework of the UNECE and the European Union, an advanced international environmental policy and legislative framework has been developed, including the 1992 UNECE Water Convention and the 1997 UN Convention on International Water Courses. Last but not least, the implications of climate change and our vulnerability have put environmental issues firmly on the security agenda. Against this backdrop, it is worthwhile to look back, taking stock of the experience in fostering water cooperation we have acquired so far, and forward, identifying appropriate policies to meet new challenges. The second anniversary I would like to refer to is next year's 40th anniversary of the Helsinki Final Act. To meet this anniversary appropriately, we have engaged in the Helsinki Plus 40 process. Our debate today on the role of the OSCE in water diplomacy can give us valuable input to guide our discussions on the future of the OSCE in the water and security field. Some questions would be of interest in this respect. For example, how could we use water diplomacy within our efforts for conflict prevention and confidence building? The Secretary General just referred to this. Which value added can we as a regional security organization bring into the emerging debate on water diplomacy? The experience of participating states should also feed into how the OSCE can address the challenges posed by water. Just let me cite two examples which outline how Switzerland has tackled the security issues surrounding water. First, there is our Blue Peace Initiative, our water diplomacy efforts in conflict-prone areas in the Middle East, Africa, and Latin America, in which I was personally very closely associated in my previous position as Director of the Human Security Department in our Foreign Ministry. Preliminary results of this Blue Peace Initiative demonstrate that water diplomacy, through dialogue, both at the political and the technical level, can help address the challenges of transboundary water management. Such dialogue allows political leaders, diplomats, and populations to put into place collaborative solutions for sustainable water management and enables them to make trade-offs between water and other needs. And I'm sure His Royal Highness will concur with this, as he was prominently associated with one of the Blue Peace initiatives and has, as recently as yesterday morning, assumed the chairmanship of the high-level forum for the Blue Peace Middle East plan. We warmly welcome you and congratulate you on your assuming of this position, Your Royal Highness. Second, Switzerland has developed much first-hand experience in how important multilateral environmental agreements and their respective intergovernmental processes are to fostering reliability and trust. In this context, having implemented the UNECE Water Convention for many years in our relations with our neighbors, we very much welcome the globalization of this convention, and we encourage OSCE participating states outside the UNECE region, as well as partners for cooperation, to join it. Water will continue to be high on the agenda for Switzerland, and as such, we are convinced that water has to be treated as one of the highest priorities in the post-2015 development agenda, and we will continue to promote and advocate for this. A number of other crucial global events besides the post-2015 development agenda, which call on us, the OSCE and its participating states, to engage, are also ongoing, or beginning soon. The UN Climate Summit in September, the development of a post-2015 framework for disaster risk reduction for the Third World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction in 2015, and last but not least, the 7th World Water Forum in April 2015 in Korea. In the context of these processes, tackling water risks is not just an imperative, but is also an opportunity. An opportunity to consider water as a catalyst for cooperation rather than a source of conflict. In a world where watercourses and lakes connect communities and nations rather than divide them. The Swiss Chairmanship fully believes that the OSCE has something to contribute to these processes and should do so. And we believe that today's event, where we will have contributions from experts from outside our organization, can strengthen our understanding about the role we want to play and the contributions we can make to these processes. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy that thanks to our joint work plan with the incoming Serbian Chairmanship, we can be confident that the ideas generated today will be taken further into next year's work and beyond. I wish to thank His Royal Highness for joining us today to share his invaluable expertise and many years of experience in the field of water. I also wish to thank all of you for your interest in this issue, which is definitely one of the major present and future security challenges we are facing. Thank you, and I look forward to interesting and inspiring discussions.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Lamberto Zannier, with his customary courtesy, wanted to introduce me yet again. But the fact is that I have spent 5 days in bed in London with bronchitis, and whether I finish this speech or not is a question of climate. So you will forgive me if I start my remarks from the podium and then possibly sit down to take your questions, which I'm keen to hear. I'd like to say from the outset that if we were to take one look at the newspaper headlines today, I think we are all excused for believing that furthering human security is an impossible endeavor. Thomas Mann once said, "Krieg ist nichts als Drückerbergerei vor den Aufgaben des Friedens." And indeed, war is nothing more than shirking from the problems of peace. So we are here to wage peace. And we seem to have made up our minds not to deal with the problems of peace, the consequences of war. The consequences of warmongering are doing irreversible damage, not only to our generations, but more importantly for our future generations. And a few weeks ago, the United Nations said that the number of refugees worldwide this year crossed 50 million for the first time since World War II. when we presented the call for an international humanitarian order to the General Assembly of the United Nations in 1988, we spoke of all the uprooted. When the United Nations speaks of refugees, it speaks of HCR mandate or UNRWA mandate, but it does not attend to the needs of stateless people, displaced people. So the overhang of population movement in our region, even before the Syria crisis, was 20 million people. The expectation in the next few years of movement, in the case of the climate change in Egypt, the rise of the Mediterranean, is 45 million people from the delta of the Nile. And yet again, another 45 million people in Iran because of drought. But I'll come to that in a minute. All I want to say here is that in the Horn and East Africa, let us look beyond the figures. Children make up as much as 60% of these quote-unquote refugees. While in the Middle East, this number is as high as 47%. Over 800,000 children die due to diarrhea every year. 800,000 children. I used to say, if you want to look something up about Prince Hassan, look at YouTube, Prince Hassan World Toilet Day, November the 17th, and everybody would smile loudly. I'd say, if your children are going to be exposed to polio, to diarrhea, we would not be smiling. This is the challenge that we are facing today. 800,000 children, just think about it. That's nearly as many children enrolled in every school in Austria. I could go on and on. Every statistic would be a telling statement on how far we are from achieving true human security. Every statistic would only serve to highlight how impossible this task is given the current situation of multilateralism. Parallel lines never meeting at a given point. No focus. And yet here we are talking about the SDGs in September, merging into the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals. Only a few weeks ago, many of us signed, over 100,000 of us signed, an appeal for justice. I never thought that the United Nations hadn't considered justice as being a development goal. But in the context, I want to say we're talking about an interconnection of ideas. Water and energy, water and hygiene, water and agriculture, and so on. It seems to me that when our Swedish friends very kindly presented the idea of resilience, a resilience center after the failure of the climate talks in Warsaw, that they were being extremely clear on the issue. The issue is resilience means interdisciplinarity, cross-cutting themes, and resilience means eco and social. But surely, giving up in the face of the impossible is not acceptable in the land that gave birth to the genius of Mozart. Speaking of Mozart, I'd like to tell you an anecdote about the great composer, which I hope is true, because so many anecdotes are apocryphal, but here goes. It is said that Mozart once challenged Haydn to play a piece that he had just composed. The composition required the musician to play a note in the high treble with the right hand and the note in the low bass with the left. There was also a note in the middle. Haydn told Mozart it was impossible to play this piece. He said it would take a person with 3 hands to play Mozart's composition. Mozart smiled. He sat down at the harpsichord and began to play. When he arrived at the part of the composition that had caused Haydn so much stress or distress, he played the bass note with his left hand, he played the treble with his right, and as for the note in the middle, He played it using his nose. Even after this amazing accomplishment, Haydn was reluctant to give Mozart a compliment. With a nose like yours, it becomes easier, he said. Today, as the world continues to grapple with the seemingly insolvable puzzle of human security, we have to ponder the question, can we all play a part in ensuring that we create a new humanitarian order based on human dignity? Or should we sit back and leave the task to a select few? The people who possess the equivalent of the nose, like Mozart. I believe that we can all and should play a part. I've been looking through many of the notes that have been so kindly prepared before this conference, and I would like to thank many of you for your contributions in a moment, but I want to go back to my central theme. To create a new humanitarian order, we need to ensure security in the global commons. We cannot focus solely on improving our technical knowledge in esoteric areas, be they in the world of finance, irrigation, or security. We need to do much more than that. We need to fundamentally alter the way we look at the world. You mentioned looking at the example of the Sofia Agreement. These agreements focused on enabling security by nurturing not the military, but rather the economic and environmental dimensions, the human dimension. It is events like Sofia that offered us a template of hope, but Sofia is already 25 years ago. Such a template is required now, especially more than ever, when we seem to be obsessed with the idea of achieving peace solely through the use of military force. Just the other day, President Obama asked the Congress for $500 million to help aid rebels in Syria. Last month, while addressing a gathering of graduates from West Point, he spoke of his vision to spend $5 billion on a fund designed to help train other nations to combat terrorism. I am told that the global war on terror has already cost $17 trillion. But it seems to have been forgotten that America alone has already spent nearly $1 trillion on military action in Iraq. If all of these $1 trillion haven't helped bringing peace to Iraq and the region, how is an additional $5 billion going to help? Martin Luther King said, the true peace is not merely the absence of tension, it is the presence of justice. That's why the agreements, such as the one reached at Sofia, are so important. But don't misunderstand me. Our conversations here are about building a concept. They are not about negotiations. So in that sense, we are not talking about justice. We are, as you described us, track 1.5. So in that sense, we are still in vision-building mode. As Iskandar Abdullayev, is he with us, points out, although CAS are rather vocal in proclaiming the Integrated Water Resource Management, IWRM, as the centerpiece of water policies, and I agree with you, I would like to say area capability, carrying capacity is what is required, because we can't look at Iraq, the Kurdish area, the Shia area, the Sunni area, Syria, the Alawites. I get rather confused even as a Muslim, because they say to me, the Americans, are you a Sunni Muslim? Are you a Sunni Muslim, they say. I say, no, I'm a cloudy Muslim. So this morselization of our region, I mean, when I was in the Balkans and met Mr. Akashi in the 1990s, we thought that morselization, that Balkanization would never come to our region. Now it has come, and it is even worse than it is in our region. In our region today, the level of hatred is unbelievable. So how can we talk about a carrying capacity, an area capability? I think that the OSCE, if you will accept my suggestion, has a unique opportunity to play a significant role in establishing a platform for ownership of the water sector. And this is why I think that your exercise today is so important. That's why I would have fretted much more by not coming than by coming. So please bear in mind that our Near East region, Eastern Mediterranean region, has never had a crisis avoidance capability. I have asked Secretaries General, since Secretary General Waldheim, why is that? And the answer was always, ask the Security Council. You ask the Security Council, the military staff committee never meets. And they have so much on their agenda that it is impossible to talk about a crisis avoidance capability for a region where you have 3 strong countries, Iran, Turkey, and Israel, the omnipresent United States, and we Arabs have become cannon fodder. All we're good for is supplying oil and more money to buy more weapons. This is the public perception. That is why there is so much anger in the street. That is why people prefer a nihilistic end to a positive one. That is why the engineering of Armageddon is part of what is happening in our part of the world. People like myself try to swim upstream like the proverbial salmon. We believe that if you face the end of days with a fruit-bearing sapling in your hand, you are obliged to plant it anyway. It is not for us to bring about the end of days. However, I would like to tell you that on nuclear security issues, we meet in Glion, in Switzerland. On water security issues, we meet in Montreux, and in Montreux we produced the call for Blue Peace, Rethinking Middle East Water, thanks to the support of Sweden and Switzerland. But if you say to the participants, and believe me, they include all the participants in a Middle East conference, it's not like, oh, well, we'll invite Iran to discuss Syria and then we disinvite her. No, we don't disinvite anybody. Everybody participates. The minute you say, let us move towards a Helsinki process, everyone says, no, you are formalizing an informal conversation. We can't afford that politically. Ladies and gentlemen, I am here to talk about policy, not politics. Nobody's going to elect me even if I ran. I think it was Groucho Marx who said I would never join a club that would have me as a member. A few years ago, Al Gore and I, believe it or not, along with 5 other people, received the UNEP Prize. Al Gore spoke of global warming and I spoke of human warming. He spoke about the imprisonment of heat and I spoke about the imprisonment of thought. Our thoughts have become chained to the old way of doing things, the old ways that place more importance on economic growth and political power rather than the furthering of human dignity and human well-being. Setting our thoughts free from these old ways will not be an easy task. For even as we come up with new ways to stumble into messy wars, we seem to have forgotten the path of peace. And because it is so important, it can also be an instrument of peace, to speak of water. As I did between India and Pakistan some years ago when I had the facility of being allowed to travel from Lahore to Delhi. Between Israel and the Palestinians. And between any 2 peoples of the world who value this precious resource enough not to fight over it. As Lucas Beck says in one of the papers, where is Lucas Beck? Somewhere. There you are. Surprisingly, the situation in Central and Eastern Europe is less satisfactory, especially when it comes to transboundary pollution aspects, you say. And in your article, you refer to research that is interested in the gravitational or proximity drivers of international water conflict, requiring high-resolution data. I want to tell you that I had the distinct privilege of serving as the chairman of the UN Secretary General's Advisory Board on Water and Sanitation. The reason I resigned from the post, having presented the action plan that was required of us in 10 months, after that it goes into debates on the 38th floor between all the SDGs and the MDGs. And don't tell me that that debate is a scientific debate. So I would like to say that when I resigned, I asked them to give me some understanding to empower people like myself to look into the depth of the crisis that currently blights our region, starting with which there is no data of any kind. There is no knowledge base in our region. They used to say knowledge is power. Today I think ignorance is power. The most effective knowledge is the domain of ministries of the interior. The ministries of, what do they call themselves? Curative medicine, I suppose. But preventive medicine, education, health, water, look at the priorities. Knowledge, in 1970-something, we started with UNDP in Buenos Aires. Bradford Morse was the administrator, and we called for an international database with a network in each of the continents. Data became informatics, informatics became knowledge. There is no knowledge. As part of my new focus, I hope to give serious time to chairing the high-level forum for the Bloom Peace Middle East. My vice chair is Yasar Yakis, the former foreign minister of Turkey, and Muhammad Shatah, God rest his soul, was assassinated in Lebanon, as we know, as all independent voices are ultimately removed from the scene. I thank also the Strategic Foresight Group in India who have given the support to this initiative. The focus on the region is in keeping with the vision many of us have cherished for a while, a vision of creating the equivalent in terms of institutional self-determination of potential partners in conflict, maybe partners in waging peace, a vision of creating the equivalent of an Arctic Council or an Antarctic Council for water and energy in the region. Since 1995, ladies and gentlemen, Europe has launched 3 major initiatives for the Mediterranean: Barcelona, European Neighborhood Policy, and more recently the Mediterranean Union. How effective have they been is an issue we can come to in discussion, but I would like to say that in contrast, no comprehensive ideas or concepts of intra-regional cooperation have been launched within our region. So there is no partnership. The absence of an internally generated vision has been conspicuous, and this is why I'm so privileged to be working as chairman of the Arab Thought Forum, founder of the West Asia North Africa Forum, with UNESCO, the Economic and Social Commission for West Asia, who I hope one day might evolve, among other things, a regional ECOSOC. So we say what we think in September before we go to the season of Bretton Woods, rather than being told what we think by Bretton Woods, or by Brookings, or by any of those who are paid to think on our behalf. The region, that is to say the Mediterranean and the Gulf, has been reacting to initiatives from our friends outside for too long. I remember Shimon Peres once making the usual Israeli lament to me. He said, "We are surrounded by enemies," he said. This was before peace with Jordan, at least. I said to him, "You think you have problems? We're surrounded by friends." The continued inability of our region to discuss, if not create, a regional process for cooperation and security can be considered as one of the destabilizing forces in West Asia. I don't want to call it the Middle East anymore because Middle East doesn't really mean too much. And on the Biden-Lugar committee some years ago, I asked them, what do you mean by Middle East? And they said, from Marrakesh to Bangladesh, from Casablanca to Calcutta. Today we're talking specifically Central Asia, South Asia, West Asia. If Iran is given the opportunity of putting the oil pipeline through Pakistan, through India possibly, linking up with the infrastructure coming from China, then maybe, just maybe, we will have an overarching Asian link. And then it becomes a little bit absurd to be talking about pivoting to the east. Because after all, what is Eurasia about if it's not already pivoted to the east? From the west. From a Japanese or a Chinese point of view, we are Middle West. I sometimes call ourselves the Wild West. The high-level forum of Blue Peace is dynamic. It is political, economic, social economic, and civil society. I am happy to say that in terms of the e-contacts, we represent at least 10 million interested people, which is quite an achievement and growing. They include all disciplines, water experts, energy experts, litigants, legal empowerment professionals, urban planners, working together in a truly comprehensive manner. In the immediate future, we'll identify vulnerable segments of society in a region that is sitting on a ticking time bomb due to the shortage of water. And the region I refer to again can be found along the shores of the seemingly placid green-blue waters of the Indian Ocean. In the past, this region has also been referred to as the Ark of Crisis. But I would like to suggest to you that there is another reference that should be made to this region. It is the channel of necessity for a large amount of the world's oil and gas and a passageway to some of the world's largest choke points, Bab el-Mandeb, the Straits of Hormuz, and the Straits of Malacca. Might I suggest to you that the concept of a marine Silk Route is worth taking into consideration, and some work has already been done on this issue. After all, we're here to talk about water. Nobody specified whether the water was supposed to be riverine or maritime. I'd like to remind you that more than 3 billion people inhabit the countries that line the marine Silk Road, representing about 40% of the world's population. A dozen of these countries are developing economies with low-cost labor and investor-friendly conditions. The marine Silk Road already carries vast amounts of cargo, including food, energy, and export textiles. The marine Silk Road also brings much-needed labor to our region. I always irritate our Iranian friends and our Arab friends in the Gulf when they talk about the Persian Gulf and the Arab Gulf. I say, no, it's the Indian Gulf. So that's why I'll never get elected by anybody. But I want to add that the global energy and water belt extends from the Central Asian republics, as you well know, Lamberto, with your recent visit, down the Volga through Turkey to the Straits of Hormuz. It can no longer be protected solely by military forces guarding the ports of the Persian Gulf, Arabian Gulf, Indian Gulf, whatever you want to call it. Sometimes it seems like those gas and oil pipelines are the only things which connect us to the rest of the world. Isn't it about time they connected us to each other? Daniel Gayada, I don't know, is he with us today? Oh, there you are in the back. You, sir, say that the EU implementing the Foreign Affairs Council conclusions, in particular to the Nile River Basin, is a step in the right direction. I would like to tell you that I'm traveling to Cairo for a discussion in December, which I hope you would be attending. And in that context, I think it's extremely important to bear in mind where we live. I don't know, all you distinguished ladies and gentlemen are surely aware of what Mesopotamia means. The land between the two rivers, Tigris and Euphrates. Iran, the land beyond the two rivers. The concept of the Nile is now becoming a regional security issue once again. And we have stopped focusing, unfortunately, on these strategic issues. We've started looking after the interests of people in a project-oriented manner, not a visionary-oriented manner. Nobody is looking to the interest of the people who neighbor the waterways, who neighbor the pipelines. And we cannot continue to ignore the legal rights of the most vulnerable and continue to disempower them from enjoying access to their fundamental human rights unless we want to push them all into the lap of the black economy and the black flags. Because quite honestly, all of this extremism is generated by the failure of good governance. The opposite of good governance is corruption. When good governance fails, corruption rises. And so you see this spread of extremism, drugs alone, from Afghanistan to Mali into Mexico and onward. Only a few years ago, Jordan was the fourth poorest water country in the world. Now we are struggling to cope with influx of anywhere between 200 to 400 Syrian refugees a day. Jordan is today the third poorest nation in terms of water resources. So it's not a Jordanian problem. It's not a Syrian problem. It's all our problem. The WHO estimates that a person needs 1,000 cubic meters of water every year and uses the number as a benchmark for water scarcity. Jordan, Gaza, and the West Bank have 100 cubic meters of water per year. Israel has 300 cubic meters of water. To put these numbers in context, Sweden has 20,000 cubic meters of water, of renewable water, per person annually. Over the last year, we heard a lot about a long and just peace between Israel and Palestine. I saw an infographic recently that showed the town of Ramallah in the West Bank gets more rainfall than even London. And yet, while the average Londoner gets over 150 liters of water per day due to man-made policies, the average person in the West Bank gets only 70. It bears noting that the WHO recommends 100 liters of water per day per person. And I ask you, can we truly talk about a long and just peace in the face of such inequities? A prominent Western minister came to see me the other day and he said, "Why are you always talking about Israel gas? This is Gaza gas," he shouted. I said, "Why are you raising your voice in my presence? Go out, make a statement, and resign." Isn't it about time that we had a knowledge base? Is water truth, or is water also dissimulation? I think it's an ultimate truth. We now hear of the many causes for the uprising in Syria, but one important reason is often overlooked. In the year before the Syrian uprising, over 250,000 farmers were forced off their lands by a shortage of water. In the months immediately preceding the uprising, we read in the Arabic media of the strain placed on Syria's already overburdened infrastructure and of the increased tensions between the urban dwellers and the internally displaced people, IDPs. These tensions stoked the restlessness that was festering in large segments of the Syrian population, a discontent that bubbled over in the March of 2011. Tom Friedman pointed out in his insightful article a few years ago, what I referred to, that within 2 decades, 45 million Iranians may be forced to look for habitat elsewhere. Ironically, the same figure applies to the delta of the Nile, where 45 million people are threatened with the next 2 decades with the rise in water levels of the Mediterranean. Andras Solosinagi is with us, the Delft Blue Skies. I want to thank you, sir, first of all, for all you did for us in Holland in the meeting that we held in Amsterdam. And I want to thank you for emphasizing the importance of what I call ignoring political boundaries. Competition, you referred to, between users and use of water. The Benelux concept has always been an attractive concept to me because it has emphasized the importance of creative commons between the countries. I don't know whether the Benelux concept would ever apply to our part of the world, but I do know that unless and until we listen to the wisdom of the Japanese parliament, the Diet, in 1988, they said there will be no stability in the Gulf region unless there is stability in the hinterland region. So all of this talk about Arab Spring leading to a Deauville fund of $35 billion, all smoke and ashes. All the talk in the MENA conference of 1994 of $35 billion for 24 countries from Morocco to Turkey, inclusive, to prevent the will of migrants to cross the Mediterranean. You see what is happening in the Mediterranean. So please let us read something a little bit more into that users and used concept. You can spend $35 billion on creating homeland security, Fortress America, in one signature, but you can't spend $35 billion with the participation of East Asia, the Gulf region, if indeed it has the will to participate in such an exercise, the OECD countries, to emphasize the importance of human security. I remember talking to the Sherpa of the German OECD delegation, who said, why do you need a regional bank for reconstruction and development? You already have the EBRD, the EBI, EIB, and I said, well, that's wonderful, but what do they do? SMEs, he said. I said, well, the whole economy is SMEs. I said, now I got it. We here are talking about social cohesion, and you from Germany are prepared to pay our social cohesion bill. Do I understand you correctly? He said, no, of course I didn't mean that. So what we need is a little bit of independence of thought. Allow us, encourage us in the region. Cajole us, force us to develop institutional self-determination. And once again, maybe it's not the right platform, but I want to tell you, when we called for the establishment of zakat, which is not correctly translated as alms, A-L-M-S, but is a form of empowerment when you zakki somebody to be something better, a refugee, for example, in all the different categories. You are spending a lot of money in empowering and enabling people to become citizens of the region on a colorblind basis, not mobility stakeholders on Mars and development stakeholders on Venus, as Peter Sutherland, my colleague on the Mobility Commission, says, but human beings as human beings, a critical mass. There's a lot of pontificating about Sykes-Picot and so forth. It doesn't concern me. We're not here as historians. What we're here is to recognize that the time has come to make a quantum leap by looking at the human dimension, the eco-social dimension in a region as a whole. I don't even want to get into the destruction that 1 million soldiers have wrought on our region in terms of the habitat. This is not the time or the place. But I want to say that we recently witnessed the Arab Spring, and if matters continue the way they are, I don't think that the question that I would like to raise continuously will go away. It remains. Can all the countries in the region who are involved in seemingly endless conflict come together to solve the water problem? My greatest joy since 3 years of Arab Spring was to sit and to listen to 200 water collectives in the Jordan Valley talking for 3 hours for the first time in 3 years on issues of content. This is what I would like to invite your institute to help us help ourselves to achieve. As for water solutions, may I remind you that in the 1940s, the United States decided to use its good standing with both Jordan and Israel to develop a unified plan for the joint development of the Jordan Basin. These series of informal picnic tables meetings led to what came to be known as the Johnston Plan. And I would like to thank Jana Huso-Kallio, thank you so much, for the Finnish-Russian Transboundary Watercourse Commission. You were one of our participants at the last meeting of the Blue Peace. And I think that this concept of thematic cooperation is absolutely essential because it rises above the politics. The Johnston Plan might have not resulted in deep policy-level cooperation or delivered all of its objectives. However, it did leave its footprints. Water cooperation was a central tenet of the peace plan between Israel and Jordan in the 90s. So, in conclusion, if the history of humankind is replete with instances of savage conflict, there are also numerous instances where humans have cooperated with each other to achieve tasks whose scope extended far beyond the lifetime spans of their lives. I've mentioned so many times the importance of the coal and steel community finding an echo in our part of the world, of a water and energy community. The European example showed us the benefit of regional cooperation in achieving peace. And to my Turkish colleague, I would just like to say, as my former friend, former Turkish President Turgut Özal, God rest his soul, told me, when there is a peace conference, it is far better to be at the table than on the menu. And while we're seated at this table, so to speak, I'd like to go into the menu. Ilya Trombitsky, international legislation welcomes public participation in environmental decisions. Are you here? Yes. Thank you. Decision-making because of several reasons. Public involvement. I would like to say that LEOP is something I would like you to read if you have not read it, sir. The legal empowerment of the poor, making the law work for everyone. This was the substance of our call for justice to the United Nations. Every agency, every player, everyone has to be mobilized, political, socio-economic, and civil society. And that's what I would like to call the intersecting circles of cooperation. This is what Blue Peace is about. Circles of cooperation enable seamless collaboration across a number of areas and across the borders of all the countries of our region. Each circle has to have a political mechanism to, 1, define a common vision, 2, identify priorities to translate that vision into reality, and 3, to identify an institutional architecture to follow up and implement decisions at policy level. The first such circle could be Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, and Jordan. Another circle could include Israel and Palestine territories eventually expanding into Jordan. At least we can simulate it. The circles would determine principles for cooperation among multiple avenues, be it goal setting for water conservation, climate change, and research and development. And the second point I'd like to make is the importance of the preservation of groundwater. And I want to thank yesterday a colleague from the IAEA who was talking about mapping groundwater. Groundwater aquifers constitute over 33.5% of available water in Jordan, 60% of freshwater resources in Israel, and make up 100% of freshwater resources in the Palestinian territories. Today, due to overpumping at the aquifer on the Israel-Gaza border, there is every danger of encroachment of salt water from Lake Tiberias. Because of the over-exploitation of the water resources, some experts predict that the effects of aquifer salination will be irreversible after 2020. If you think we have a potentially explosive situation in Gaza, let me assure you it pales before what is coming 5 years down the line. That's why it's absolutely essential that we extend the scopes of circles of cooperation to preserve these valuable sources of water. Thirdly, I'd like to focus on the effects of migration. In recent years, millions of people have been displaced within their countries or crossed to new countries due to violence over the effects of climate change. Currently, the Zannier Syrian refugee camp in Jordan requires 4,000 cubic meters of water a day. Every day, more than 270 tankers deliver water to the refugees living in the camp. There's little point of thinking of these refugees as a Syrian problem, as I said. A recent study estimates that the refugees are displaced from their home countries for an average of 17 to 20 years, according to David Miliband and IRC, 20 years. Given the extended length of time a refugee stays in the host country, can we afford to keep thinking of these people as Syrians or Egyptians or Iraqis? What about thinking of them as Arab citizens? If they're European citizens, Arab citizens. They're not necessarily nationals of Jordan or nationals of this one or that one, but at least give them some kind of recognition and regional citizenship. Which brings me back to Nabil Arabi and the discussion on water with the Arab League. It also brings me to the all-important issue of empowerment. We need to focus on solutions that empower and enable people to make them part of the solution. Only then can we arrive at truly sustainable solutions. The joint ownership of water by residents that live along the Danube and the rice farmers in the Australian outback, or the 3 nationalities that border the Bodensee, 300 towns own the water of the Bodensee. These are examples, I think, that should be followed. I'd like to end by saying that we are at the crossroads, and we have a choice to make. On one end, we can continue to live by taking water for granted, and this would be a major tragedy for even the very people who seem so determined to send us to the end of time seem to recognize the value of water. Recently, there were reports in the media of the dangers of the Mosul Dam falling to ISIS, or ISIL. And if that were to happen, scientists say Mosul would be completely flooded within hours and a 15-foot wall of water could crash into Baghdad. I'm rather happy to think that our Swedish friends are still involved with maintaining the security standards of the dam. I don't know whether the dam has changed hands or not. But it seemed that with these extremist groups, there are 2 lines that should not be crossed. One is Western interests, quote unquote, and the other is attacking Israel. I don't think the first has yet been crossed because the refinery seems to be going pretty well, and the dam has not yet been broken. But the threat remains, and this is water, empowerment through water. The last point I would make, as we call for cultural heritage to be preserved, let me remind you that Babylon was destroyed by tanks turning it into a public parking lot, Babylon, and today Nineveh of the Assyrians, both great water civilizations, is under threat. The fact that many of these works of art that are coming to the West are being sold means that somebody is buying them. But you can't transport the environment of the cradle of civilization from one part of the world to another, however despoiled that part of the world may be. The Americans didn't find the weapons of mass destruction when they went looking for them 11 years ago. However, ISIL has grasped a fundamental truth that seems to have eluded the rest of us. If water can give us life, then destroying the systems that deliver water, and indeed the systems that give stability to populations, can take life away from them. And that is all they want to do. Our region has been home to arid lands. However, now it appears that most arid lands live in the matter we carry between our ears. The absence of will, the absence of thought, and the lack of constructive ideas explain why we are so arid at this time. Maybe I should read two stories in the media that give hope. The UAE launched a new water aid campaign whose objective is to provide 5 million people with water worldwide. What is most encouraging about the program is that students in the UAE will learn a new 21st century skill: how to raise awareness of the value of water. That's a skill we need to have on all of our children's curricula. And the second story is about new water ATMs launched in Delhi. Anyone from India here in this hall? Residents of the resettlement colonies in the national capital are able to draw from the water ATMs, paying a token amount less than a cent for 4 liters of water. While people in Delhi spent large portions of their day to get water, now they can get clean water from an ATM that dispenses not just cash, but life and human security. So let's collaborate on water. Thank you for your time, for your imagination, for making the impossible possible. Thank you for believing that we might all be able to play the piano, to play piano keys with our fingers as well as our noses. Have a productive conference. Forgive me for overburdening you, but I regard you as partners in this exercise. God bless you. Thank you all very much. And if you'd like to pose any questions, maybe we can convene at the, or I'm quite happy to stay here if you would like to go ahead. Please go ahead. This should be a two-sided exercise.
Thank you very much, Your Royal Highness, for this inspiring statement. And I'm sure that we will refer back to many of the points you have raised during today's discussion. There were so many points. It's really hard for me to reflect all of them in my comments. You mentioned the climate change, drought-related migration, and hotspots like Iran, Nile Delta, and the importance of the regional policies to offer potential refugees the possibility to have livable conditions at home. You mentioned the coal and steel community and the need to create maybe a water and energy community, and the importance of preservation of groundwater. Your engagement in the high-level forum, Blue Peace, showed that it is possible to create a community of high-level personalities that believes in the benefits of water cooperation and are committed to foster this as a contribution to peace and security in the region. We at the OSCE believe that the strong links between security and water. And this is for the future a very crucial issue, not only for the OSCE region, but for the whole world. But since the Security Days strive for an interactive debate, I will not use up much time for my own comments, but rather give the floor immediately to the audience. Who would like to be the first to take the floor? Please introduce yourself and statements, and your statement should be concise to allow everyone to take part in the debate. Yes, please, Mr. Ambassador.
سمو الأمير صباح الخير. الحمد لله على السلامة. Welcome here. Khaled Shama, Ambassador of Egypt. After thanking you for a very eloquent, very informative speech, a basic element now, when you look at the case of Jordan at hand, you're right with the influx of immigrants, refugees from Iraq, from Syria, Palestinians, of course. That does make an overburden on the already scarce water resources. I actually have a question to you on two counts. First, what you referred to the Johnson Plan, the division of the Jordan River water. How's the situation now? As well as the aquifers. How can it be redressed? How can it be dealt with? Especially that this situation of water scarcity is prevalent in other areas, and let's say other desert areas within the region, be that in North Africa or even in the Gulf. So how do you see ways of redressing that acute shortage of water? And thank you very much.
Maybe we can take them also. Please, Ambassador Zannier.
Yeah, I would also like to thank you, Your Highness, for this presentation. I think we needed the big picture. I wanted to come back to one point you raised, and this was the issue of politics versus policies. And I suspect politics will always be there. We won't get rid of them. But that's why we will need stronger policies. When it comes to water, do you think we should make an effort to try to mainstream water-related issues in a broader context and try to have water more present in engagements, for instance, on conflict prevention, and try to force an angle in broader initiatives focusing on water because of the long-term perspectives of that, and also looking at other areas of education, for instance, you refer to that in a slightly different context, but maybe also raising awareness of younger generation for issues of this kind, all working with civil society and having NGOs from different countries, from regional environments, focusing also on water as an issue completely, so a kind of a bottom-up approach. What is your advice in these fields? Thank you.
Next question, please.
Your Royal Highness, I'm the Ambassador of Romania to OSCE and other international organizations in Vienna. Thank you also for your very interesting expose. And my question refers to the extent to which countries in the, let's call it, Middle East, could learn from the experience in Europe in as much as water management is concerned. I'm referring in particular to the experience of the management of the river Danube in terms of practical projects, but also in terms of institutional setting, because I'm sure you know, here in Vienna there is the Secretariat of the ICPDR, International Commission for the Protection of Danube River. And all boils down also not only to the use of water, but also to the protection of water. Thank you.
I don't think that any of our states in the region at this time, I'm talking about the Levant region in particular, has the ability of solving the requirements of a population in tens of millions simply because one party has chosen to use violence against another party. I wish I could say that this was only characteristic of the Arab or the Palestinian-Israeli confrontation, but it's now also the Arab-Arab confrontation, which is making the whole demography of the region look extremely difficult to sustain in any form of dignity. So what we're trying to do is to develop a concept based on knowledge. And I think that the creation, to go to Lamberto Zannier's question, of politics versus policy, what we need when we speak of water in the broader context is a supranational approach. But you can't talk about it in a supranational way. You have to talk about non-threatening confidence-building measures. Because if you say supranational, people are immediately going to think that this is going to take away from your sovereignty, to take away from your national dominance. No, I think that you have to talk about confidence-building measures through non-threatening policies. I don't think there's anything threatening about the policy, correct me if I'm wrong, if we're speaking openly in the way that we are speaking at this time, where you're inviting views and counter-views. Secondly, I think that to touch on the second part of your question in terms of education and bottom-up approach, this is all bottom-up approach because governments are locked into a certain MO, modus operandi. If you speak to the World Bank today, they say, we are happy to support the national budget of countries X, Y, and Z. But if you talk to them about refugees, there's not so much interest in providing blankets as there is in supporting the national budget. My question is, how long, if we're going to educate policymakers, how long will it take before fiscal flows begin to flow to the regions of the respective countries that are affected by the migration flows? How long will it take for us to be objective in looking at this as a generic problem? And as I said, it's not an Egyptian problem, a Syrian problem, an Iraqi problem, a Palestinian problem, a Jordanian problem alone. It is all our problem. So in that sense, when I say UNESCO, what I welcome about the Economic and Social Commission of West Asia, that it's the only organization that is working at the professional level at this time. With all due respect to the Arab League's last conference held in Jordan was focused on the breakdown of good governance. And I thought there was more meaning to that conference and that title, simply because the Arab League is not supported to the extent that it should be by the Arab countries, who, if they are going to go to the United Nations in September, and I think there are 6 Arab countries involved in monitoring this process, maybe Dr. Hakam, you could speak to the ambassador of Egypt in a minute and explain who those 6 countries are. I am trying to meet with them in Tunis before they go, possibly, to say, what are you going to say? What is the Arab case? What is the thematic case? So what is the generic case? So to go to your point, Ambassador, the Ambassador of Romania, I'd just like to say that, yes, the Danube Commission has always been an example, for me certainly, in developing a Jordan Rift Valley Commission, the biggest Rift Valley in the world, from the western coast of the Red Sea all the way to Turkey. Why is it that we can't develop here an organic process, step by step, where we look at all the aspects of water in terms of, as I said, water and hygiene, water and M&I, water and agriculture, and so forth. But if we continue the way we are, talking about engagement with foreign assistance without a concept which is authentic and generic coming from the region, then that assistance is going to go to flavor of the month projects, which are not going to address or diminish the kind of existential problem that we are facing. Although I want to say that, of course, even in the Danube, the question of cyanide poisoning and so forth in the Danube have been extremely educational for us, because the whole idea of Tiberias, for example, being poisoned, or the attempted poisoning of the Bodensee, all of these things have not gone unnoticed. And they have a lot to contribute in terms of a human security answer to a basic security issue, or a current security issue. Basic security, as you know, is weapons of mass destruction, including chemical, and current security is terror-related. If we have an institutional answer that is clear, transparent, effective, and with good governance, such as a supranational regional commission, of course you have the Nile Basin, which is a supranational commission. If a moment comes where this evolves into a management concept, this would be a step very largely in the right direction of creating regional creative commons. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Royal Highness. I see another question here, please.
Deputy Head of Armenian Delegation, David Knezyan. Sabah al-Khair wa ahlan wa sahlan ila Vienna. Your Royal Highness, I have a question in regard of the level of cooperation between Israel and Jordan on the rivers of Jordan River, on the waters of Jordan River. I believe that there should be also something positive in this regard, and there should be also best practice, good lessons that we could learn from your region as well. Because one of the distinctive features of Orient is its wisdom. What could you share with us in this regard? What are the positive examples of cooperation between Israel and Jordan on creating sustainable, ecosystem of Jordan River? Thank you.
Yes, please. I don't. Okay. We take these three questions, then the time is over. Please, Ambassador.
Vytautas Naudužas, Lithuania. Your Royal Highness, excellent report, félicitations. Increasing water disasters, water stress, are they consequences of the lack of noses for water security, or the lack of interest? Actually, what we seek, water sun frontier or frontier sun water. Your proposal, energy and water security, energy and water community, excellent. But for that, we need to pay much more attention for water efficiency, water savings, water treatment, new technologies, and this is not free of charge. From where we can get money for this global issue? Thank you.
And the last question, please.
Thank you. Your Royal Highness, good morning. I'm Bart de Vos from Belgium, and I'm President of the World Youth Parliament for Water. I had the honor to meet you last year in The Hague on the occasion of the World Water Day, and it was a true pleasure to have the honor to be again a witness of an intervention from your side. My question is, first of all, I would like to thank you for your messages, and especially for pointing out the importance of formal education and awareness raising among young people. But I would like to remind all of us that when we talk about awareness raising of young people, there is not only an important role for formal education, but also for the work of youth movements and youth organizations themselves, who are doing across the planet very valuable work on raising awareness among their young peers, their young friends. Unfortunately, often these youth organizations and youth movements lack the real recognition and official support from governments, from organizations, to be truly effective in their operations. So I would like to ask you if you have any recommendations, suggestions on how to make these youth organizations benefiting from more support and so becoming more effectively. And to conclude, let me also mention that as the World Youth Parliament for Water, we are at the full disposal of the Blue Peace Initiative to contribute to mobilizing youth organizations and youth individuals for contributing to the overall mission of the Blue Peace Initiative. Thank you.
I'd like to thank, I believe the question was from an Israeli gentleman, the first question?
Armenian.
Armenian, I see. Well, I would like to say that as far as the cooperation with Israel is concerned in the water agreements, in the peace agreement, as I can't recall the exact shares of partition between Jordan and Israeli agreements as they stand, particularly as we enter into the summer months where water shortage is predicted. But I do know that there is a continuing debate over this issue, and one of the functioning aspects of that peace treaty, maybe one of the redeeming aspects of that peace treaty, is the water aspect. But on the other hand, I want to say that in the broader context, all the wells that we dug in 1967, before 1967, in what was then the West Bank of Jordan, which were regarded by the American Point 4 program as non-productive wells, today seem to be overproducing. So I want to say that the question is one also of trust, of a regional trust. If you talk to the technicians, the relationship is scientific, empirical, pragmatic. If you talk to the politicians, that's what enters, that's what brings the problem to light. I mean, if you talk about our meetings in Montreux, for example, yes, Israelis were there, and every other nationality in the region was there. And I was there. And then we went to Sinop in Turkey, and everybody was there. And then came the moment of the meeting in Jordan. Now remember, the convener is SGF, the Strategic Foresight Group. They are the facilitator. If you want to be a facilitator, Lamberto, that is what I would point out. The minute the meeting was convened, Israel chose to send the minister, I can't remember who it was at the time, of settlements, who made a bombastic statement about Israel's rights in settlement and almost disrupted the whole conference before he had even arrived. And all sorts of complaints came from all over the world, all over the Arab world. And I thank the Indian facilitator for saying we extended the invitation, it wasn't the Jordanian. So the problem about point scoring is that where policy is still affected by politics. But today, reality is beginning to bite. We needed the desalination of the water with the use of gas, and therefore an agreement has been created in the context of Aqaba and the Red Sea. I think realities will begin to force themselves, but they have to force themselves within the context of an internationally facilitated, equitable, logical conclusion to water stress, not on the basis of power politics. I mean, I resigned after 10 months as advisor to the Secretary General of the United Nations on water issues. I could not raise a single Arab-related water issue. I'm sorry to say the Secretary General of the United Nations got up and walked out in Budapest when the Saudi prince stood up to speak, the son of Prince Sultan. Might have been an absence of protocol, but it was what it was. The minister from Gaza was not allowed into the room to make his statement. And he looked at me with tears in his eyes and he said, Gaza water is an amana, a trust on your shoulders. I don't want to tell tales, but it is a very, very difficult task to negotiate even a few minutes for an embattled population in one of the highest human density regions in the world to talk about water. And then you look at all these bearded gentlemen, in parentheses, I don't want to define who is the gentleman, all the killing, all the beheading, all the bloodletting. And you ask why? Well, there must be a reason why. I mean, this level of embitteredness is the reason why. So anyway, to move on to bilateral relations, I want to say that, yes, they are moving slowly against enormous difficulties on all sides. In terms of energy and water and cooperation examples, I just want to conclude by saying that on regional cooperation, I'm delighted that the Montreux process continues with Blue Peace. And I want to say that it includes participants from all the countries of the region, including the support of Switzerland and Sweden. In terms of public awareness and water aid to low-income communities, if you're interested, gentleman who put the question, community-based initiatives for water demand management, the Middle East and North Africa network of water centers of excellence, all of these things are on record as doing the work that unfortunately is not publicized in the newspapers. But the question is, can this be a priority of OSCE? It's not a peripheral issue anymore. It is a key issue, and that's what brought me to talk to you. And I want to suggest to you all, in conclusion, that resilience demands an existential strategy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Royal Highness. And I would also thank you for giving our Security Day on water diplomacy such a thought-provoking start. We speak always about thought-provoking speeches, but this was really covering this expression. Thanks also to the contributions from the floor. And we have only 20 minutes left for the coffee break. Please, we want to see you all back at 11:30.